Good morning. We are literally the last page of Ayin Beis, volume 3, page 1477. This will be the last few lines that the Rebbe Rashab wrote. As we know, he did not conclude the Hemshech. However, he definitely left it on a high note because this is a very heavy and complex and deep piece where he's talking about what existence looks like from the lens of Atzmus, of God. And I say Atzmus, as I've mentioned many times, Atzmus can mean many things, but here it doesn't necessarily mean Atzmus that we talk about the ultimate Biltimitzias Nimtza. We're talking about from God's perspective, Das Elyon, but even more than Das Elyon, this is a level where Das Elyon and Das Tachton come together, as we'll soon learn. But regardless, it could be Das Elyon itself. And what is he saying? That from our point of view, it's very clear that God created two tracks. That was the discussion that began page 1474 till the bottom of 1476. Two tracks. What he called two ritzenis, a rotzen for an oir that's beyond existence, beyond being a mocker for yesh, and an oir that relates to existence, as we learned at length. And the tzimtzum and parsa come to distinguish between them. Because obviously, as they are in their root, meaning from the God, the Creator, they're both intertwined to the point that they're equal. The yichud is equal. One is not different than the other because they're both two desires that God has. But from Atzmus' point of view, even after the tzimtzum and parsa, which allows for these two tracks to manifest in our existence, like he said, ein shum hevdel v'hefsek klal. And the Orshu Mokala Yesh, meaning the second ayin, the level of ayin that becomes the Mokad Yesh, so in truth is we have here two levels of yichud, if you think about it. Even from the perspective that there are two tracks, so also then the source, there's still like one. But there, that one has a desire for both of them. Here we're talking about that even after the tzimtzum and parsa, where there is, from our point of view, two tracks, and there's structure, and there's a lakuz that relates to existence, but from God's point of view, the tzimtzum and parsa does not conceal, which is something he already made clear on page 1474 and repeats it on 1476. And therefore, imken kol ma shenisavim menu. So everything that's created by the ayin of the yesh, that's a mokad to the yesh, is also b'bchinas bitl v'yichud b'tachlis from that perspective. So it's like we, on this side of the curtain, cannot see the intense divine energy that is part of existence, which is on the highest level equal to the divine energy that's beyond existence. We can't see it. But if you're standing on the other side of the curtain, even though there is a curtain that allows for a perspective like ours, from that side of the curtain, all of it is just a lakus. And so the ayin shel yesh and the yesh and the sava harimoy k'moy ba'atzilus, they're like an atzilus, where there the oir ub'chinas yichud v'gam ha'kelim and yichud ir v'chayu yichad ir v'gamu yichad. And so too is it biyah from that perspective. And furthermore, it's even higher than that. It's the way it is, how God is envisioning it all, what he calls shir atzmei b'kayach, which is even higher than Atzilus. Definitely Atzilus the protis. So there, the root of it all, there's no existence altogether. Atzilus, it's an existence, but it's all unified. The Ur and the Keli are all like one with godliness, because it's all senses that God, it's simply instruments of God. Here we're not even talking about instruments. Here it's not even a Metzias klal. So also Abiyah, La'acharat Simtsum, is the way it is, and God's envisioning it. It's the equal. So then what do we mean when we say that God created? Bereshis bara Elokim is not just from our perspective. God created existence. So what does Bria mean in that context? Which really goes back, apparently, on the top of page 1477 here, to the question he asked at the bottom of 1474. First he asked was, why there are two levels of ayin? And his answer was because there's two tracks from the outset. But he also asked, because everything is godliness. So I would say that most likely, when he says Inyan Abriya, is coming to answer that question. So how do we explain Bria? What happened? What's created here? So he explains Bria now in a very different way than we see it. For us, Bria is the beginning of everything. If there's no creation, we don't exist. So Bereshis Bara Elokim is the beginning of time and space and everything that we know about existence. From God's point of view, Bria is simply a manifestation of a desire of his. He's calling that B'chinas his galus bilvad. I'm explaining it this way. I was actually wanted to look up to see if in Sefer Erchim Chabad, which Rabiel composed and was the editor, whether he comes to explain this line, what means his galus levad. But I'll explain it meanwhile as the way I understand it. There could be other ways to explain it. There's no question about that. But he says here, Bria is his galus bilvad. Bria from the Lashon Gilui. So as a different type of context, when you're talking about from Hashem, it's simply a desire that is manifesting. But remember, it's all above time in a way. It's conceptual, but it is a Bria. And God invests himself to create, and he wants us to come into this world. So even the fact that we are independent consciousness is also part of God's creation. But from his point of view, it's simply a hisgalus. The Kamoishu Basmuse Kenu Bab hisgalus. So something did emerge, but there's nothing new here. It's all part of him, and the way it's in Atzmus, that's how it comes out hisgalus. Vakol B'chinas hisgalus Batzmuse, and even that is also all encompassed within the core, because you can't say Ein Shayach Klal Yitziv hisgalus Chutz Latzmuse. Because then from that perspective, there's nothing outside of him. So you have to say within the etzem itself, there's a recognition, if you wish, some manifestation of what we call creation. But it's all part of the godly unity. And he's going to give now, we'll continue now learning the example for this, which is going to be obviously extremely helpful. How do you explain this? So he goes back now, and I'm starting to learn where we stopped here. Line 3 on page 1477. Pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. He says, V'yuvan zeh, commission is bar le'il, ba'atzmusei. I'm sorry, ba'hamoshel. That, as explained earlier, earlier he means page 1475, 2 pages back. Example, if you remember, the mashpia and the makabel, where the seichel of the mashpia has in the two aspects. One is his own seichel. The other is the seichel that he is going to use to explain to a student. What he called pnimius and chitzenius. That's what he called. But as long as it's within the mashpia, the chitzenius radiates with the same intensity like the pnimius. So he's going back to that moshel. But moshel da mashpia makabel da mashpia arigam bechitzenius aseichel. Mashpia also is the outer dimension of seichel, which means seichel that is not necessarily expressing all of him, only a part of his intelligence. Meir etzle kol apnimius. So the chitzenius seichel, which for the student point of view is only going to be one dimension of what he's going to teach. Like I explained, the aleph of Anochi, for example. So the student, the child, hears aleph. Yes, from the aleph, he can ultimately grow and come to understand more. But right now, it is, again, from the perspective of the recipient, it's a particular level of energy that identifies and relates to the student or to the makabel. But from the point of view of the mashpia, even that chitzenius haseichel is just like the primis, or let's use exact words. Meir etzle kol primis. In the chitzenius, it radiates within. Like when he looks at the aleph, he sees anochi and the whole aseres adibris and kol haTorah kula. Just using that example I gave. The same idea. Anything that he teaches, even though from the recipient's point of view, it's a very defined structure of what he's teaching, but from his point of view, within it radiates the entire primus. V'im kain, etzle hachitzenius eina nivdal klal min haprimus. So based on that, the chitzenius, which will, you should say, the chitzenius that will become so-called separate after the tzimtzum in the parsa, from the point of view of the student, by him it's not separate at all from the pnimius. You don't say his mind, that he has in his mind one level of his own understanding, another level of how it's going to be explained to a student. In his mind, all of it is part of one big reality. However, with the tzimtzum, he's only going to teach certain parts of it. But he doesn't get diminished. There's nothing, and this chitzenius has all the pnimius within it. There's no havdalah. Rak shehu b'chinas is galus yeser. So what do you call it then? Call it his galus yeser. So why is it, in other words, why are we calling it chitzenius in the first place? Just say it's one intelligence of the teacher, of the mashpia. Because the bottom line is, he is going to teach only a part of it to the makabel. And there will be a specific element. So what you call it is his galus yeser. In other words, if the teacher did not prepare himself to teach the aleph, meaning he had to concentrate and say, from all the intelligence, I'm going to now teach one aspect of it, and then it wouldn't be taught properly. He has to define it. He calls that his galus yeser. Because without that, there's no revelation. It's all one big, you can call it one big infinite mass of intelligence. And you want it to be channeled and taught. So therefore, there's a chitzenius. In other words, basically, it's the potential for chitzenius, essentially, or the capacity, or I don't want to use the word envision because he's going to say it in a moment about hashara b'keach, but he's not using it right now, so I'm not using that expression. So bottom line is, that's the example he's giving. Now, obviously, this is a human example. It's not quite exactly how it is in Atzmus, from Atzmus' point of view, but it's an example that explains what means something comes more bisgalus. It means that, think of it this way. Right now in your mind, you have tremendous amount of information beyond what you can even focus or concentrate on. When you focus on one particular idea, doesn't mean that all the other ideas disappear. So you have a tremendous amount of data information in your mind. When you decide, I'm going to now focus and concentrate on a particular idea, that's called his galus. Within you, it's now becoming something that you're aware of, or you're defining in some way. But if you think about it, is it separate from the rest of your intelligence? It's not. The only thing, it's now become, you're conscious of it. And in a second, you could also become conscious of something else. It's something like when I said about, example with the artist. An artist wants to create one piece of art, but that doesn't define him. He can create infinite types of art. However, to create one, he determines, I'm going to take from my infinite possibilities, I'm going to choose one. So that is what he's calling his galus yeser. It's more revealed because it's more conscious, more defined, so to speak. But it's all part of his infinite capacity. Again, I'm using extra words here that the Rebbe Rashab doesn't say just to explain the idea, especially with the example that he's giving now. Okay, so that's his galus yeser. So that's what he means, his galus. So when Abraham said, I want to create existence, Bereshis bara, from his point of view, is simply taking from his all-pervasive unity and saying, I'm going to channel into a creation called Bereshis bara, creating heaven and earth. At a certain point, I'm going to create time, space, and everything that comes with existence. And being that the tzimtzum does not conceal from his point of view, it's all one within him. However, the tzimtzum does have an effect on the creation itself, that the creation should be of substance and matter and have an independent consciousness. Okay. I don't recall, frankly, in Chassidus, in my Morim at least, in Torah Shalom, the Rebbe Rashab does speak such language a bit, but in my Morim, I don't recall any mimer that speaks quite this language or this perspective. But I may be wrong. I have to look. The Rebbe Rashab maybe has elsewhere this type of language. I have to look it up. But if there isn't, then it's quite unique. I'm not going to be shocked if this says somewhere another mimer. I'm just saying it's not something very common. Okay, let me stop for any questions.
The only way that seems to me to be explained, why should Hashem want to have the second the lower level. It's direct from him. We have to connect it to Nis'ave Diro B'Tachtenim. Correct?
Yeah, but he's not addressing here the why. The why is because Nisava Kosh Baruch Hu Liyisle is Baruch Dira B'Tachtenim. Correct. In Atzmus, he has the desire. That's why he's doing it. Here he's talking about once he desires it, how does he look at it? Because remember, desiring a dir b'tachtenim, God is still, actus apshuta is all pervasive everywhere. Here he's discussing more, how do you reconcile, how does God look at existence when there's only one godliness, then there's only one God. But the why, yes, correct. The reason he's doing it, because the Nesav is not really a reason. Alter Rebbe says, "Afach taiven ishto can kasha." You can't ask why, but that is the driving force, is the Nesav, correct. But here, the real theme here is not why God's doing it, but how we, in our contemplation, Hashem Echad and Shema Yisrael, come to understand existence. That from our point of view, it's very clear. Tachtenim, it is because there's a Simsum and a Helam and a Parsa, so we have Tachtenim. A world that the Alter Rebbe explains in Perek Lamed Vav and Tanya, Pesach Kof L'Mechupel, and to the extent of that they say Ani V'Avsi Eid. But from Atzmus' point of view, how does he look at existence? That's how he's explaining that here. But yes, I'm just saying what he's focusing on here. If I may add, there's something I always, over the years, I've always thought about, and I've never seen it in Chassidus explicitly, but I always thought of it this way. We know that creation itself has parameters. We live in the year Tavshin Pei Hey, 5785. That means, as the Maggid explains, he says, what was there before creation? He says, there was no before. Time itself is a creation. So fine. So look at existence, time and space, a particular entity. And God has the power to do that, and he created, like an artist created a piece of art. But from God's point of view, this package, let's call it, this defined parameter called 5,785, or take Shit Alpha Shnin, that the structure of existence is 6,000 years. It corresponds to the 6 midas. It has its parameters, it has its borders, it has its definitions. From God's point of view, all that is part of his infinite reality, like we're saying here. So is it really defined by time and space from God's point of view, or only from our point of view? So in a way, existence is, you can't call it infinite, because at the end of the day, God only allocated that much energy of divine energy into it, which defines its parameters. But from his point of view, you could say it's connected with all his infinite reality. So the finite is part of the infinite, and even beyond that, and that turns it into something which is far beyond something we could fully wrap our head around. So when a neshama comes into this world and does a mitzvah, in a way, like he says in Tanya, Yichud Zel Lamayla Nitzchi Hu Le'elam Vod, the mitzvah triggers and releases an energy that is nitzchi, forever, is because we're connecting time to above time. We discussed this earlier. We're connecting the world of Leisha Nisi, God's immutability, that should manifest in a mutable and changing world. In other words, we're taking finite and revealing that its infinite power. And in that sense, this level of Achdus we're talking about here, from God's perspective, does have an impact, because without it, if we didn't connect to that, then everything would be, okay, we live in a finite world, we will align the finite world with what God wants us to do through Torah and mitzvahs. Every mitzvah has its structure, and yes, you've now connected, you made a dira b'tachtenim, a home for the divine, but is it for the entire divine, or only the part of the divine that fits and is tailored into the structure of existence? But when you see it from this point of view, in addition to what we said before, that even after the tzimtzum, from God's perspective, I'm sorry, what he said before was that that the tzimtzum does not affect him. So in addition to that, we also learned that from God's point of view, both Deis, Dasai, and Das Tachten are one. But here he's going even further. He's saying even after the tzimtzum does not affect, because tzimtzum is just another power of the divine that conceals. So I just wanted to throw that into the pot to understand a little more this level of Achdus. Okay. So let's continue, unless somebody wants to ask anything else.
I'd like to ask, and I'll disclose I'm still having a hard time following. It's not because I don't understand what you're saying. I understand your words, but it's just I need to reconfigure how I thought I understood it. If the Eberster is making the creation a discrete manifestation of his infinite self, if you will, the Chachila, from the outset, then why does he need two separate tracks to begin with? What's the purpose of the other track, meaning the track that's above existence? Because that's, in other words, you think he needs only one track in the parsa.
It's for us. It's in order for us to climb the ladder to understand different higher levels of bittul. So the lower track is the divine that we relate to. The higher track is the divine beyond us. And then there's the highest, the third, where they both are like one.
Mm-hmm. Is there a functional besides?
Bittul. It's called bittul mitzias. It's a deeper level of bittul when you come to realize that all of it, that God is completely beyond existence. The first track, the lower track, that is the ayin of the makar of yesh, is a divine that relates to you. So you're still a mitzias, a yesh. That's bittul. The second teaches you how to become completely absorbed in something beyond you.
And the first track. I know I'm switching first and second, but by first I mean Bleegvul, leaf.
No, I mean first. I mean the ayin of the. I'm going from the bottom up.
I know.
The ayin of the yesh nivra is the first. I'm calling that the first from the bottom up.
Yeah, I get it. I was switching. That's why I said I'm switching. Okay, now let's refer to the second track, which is Bleegvul, which is Lifnei Tzimtzum, correct?
They're both Lifnei Tzimtzum, except they're not. You can't distinguish them there, but they originate before the Tzimtzum.
Right. Okay. Very well said. But what you're calling the second track remains Bleegvul perpetually, correct?
It's a perspective that says that existence is completely insignificant, and therefore it evokes Yichudei Allah and a bittul b'mitzias, not just a bittul hayesh. That's its purpose and effect.
So its existence enables us to connect with that type of existence. Is it fair to say that?
The whole reason for it is because God wants us to have a taste of that type of reality.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah, I thought I said this quite a few times. Not that I have no problem repeating. And especially if you go back to volume 1, the second half of volume 1, he discusses at length the role of the that is higher than existence. And he explains at length the bittul that it creates. But it's very much aligned with this.
No, you've said it many times. I'm just, like I said, I'm having a hard time reconfiguring because I mislearned it the first time.
And then there's, of course, the bigger question is, what does the third level add to the second level?
Yeah, that's a whole, I assume you're going to go there at some point.
Well, he's going there himself here, step by step. And
okay, thank you.
Ukamoi Kain says that, continues the Rebbe Rashab. Ukamoi Kain, klolis inyan haisavus. Now that he gave the example back from the Mashpia Makabel, he's saying, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped the parentheses. To go to parentheses. The parentheses is quite complex itself. Let me do the parentheses first, before the Kamei Kain. Sorry, I skipped that. This parentheses I struggled with the first time we learned it, and I'm still struggling with it, but I'll try my best to go over it again. Because here he says, V'yesha masim, Rebbe Rashab is saying. So he gave now this example of chitzenius and pnimius as it is in the mashpia, in the mind of the mashpia. So chitzenius is not separate from the pnimius. It's only more revealed, meaning it's more defined, it's more expressed, if you wish. Okay, so now he says, "V'yesem masim lezeh." What's even more fitting to this discussion, which apparently he means even more than the moshel I just gave. I'm going to add another point to really drive the point home. It's more fitting. Il yitzur sheyeh nikra chitzenius b'li hisal mesaer ba'atzmei she'en b'chinas nivdal rak b'chinas isgalus. So in the example of the mashpia, there the chitzenius is not separate from the pnimius. We're just discussing it. It's like if you see, I'm just trying to find an example. Yeah, let's take this the example I give all the time. The one cell of a newly conceived child. So it's one cell, which will then split into 2, then 4, 8, etc. After 9 months, please God, you have a full healthy child with close to 75 trillion cells and all the other the details of this child. You look at the cell itself, that one cell, you can't see any of that. However, you have to say it's included in there. However, it's a koyachiyuli, it's the capacity, it's a behelim, however you want to explain it, is there. And you can't distinguish between pnimius and chitzenius. You'll see where I'm going with this in a moment, because it's all part of one cell. It's like anything, like the sun has many different energies that it gives off: X-rays, infrared, ultraviolet, light, heat. Within the sun, it's all part of that burning sun, that furnace called the sun. Then when the sun starts shining, the light, as it emerges, there's the spectrum, just like, for example, light itself. Light is like a whitish light, but then it goes through the prism, and you can see actually colors, the colors of the rainbow, as the light is bent in different ways, which creates colors. But they all originate in one place. So my point is, going back to the example, so in the mashpia, the pnimius and chitzenius of a seichel are all part of one thing. It's only when he starts teaching, where he employs the tool, the instrument called simtsum, or simtsum and parsa, that now only part of what he wants to say, or part of what is in his mind, is being taught. Now he prepared himself. He's going to teach Aleph, Beis, Gimel. That's it. It's very defined. That's called duta hisalmus, that causes that particular idea to express itself. What he called his galus yeser. But remember, by the Eibishter, he's saying, imagine that you were able to see the chitzenius without the pnimius. I'm sorry, you were able to see the chitzenius in the mind without any concealment at all. Right now, we're conceptualizing it. Like I said, the one cell, you have to conceptualize it because you don't see chitzenius and pnimius. Everything is one. But let's say you were able to imagine it, that's Ili Yitzur, without the Salma Sa'er Ba'atzmei. So if you're able to do that, remember, the teacher himself has to, like he said earlier, has to prepare himself. Before he's actually going to teach Aleph Beis, in his mind, he prepares himself. However, even when he does that, it remains part of his oneness, you can say. The chitzenius is part of the pnimius, but he has prepared it. But imagine that there's no hisalmus at all within himself. Because if you remember, he said that he has to sit down and prepare a lesson plan, let's say. We're not even talking about teaching it actually to the student, just in his own mind. But imagine with God, you don't even need that. So if there's no hisalmus at all, what does it look like? That which he's going to, the creation, what does the creation look like? So he's saying that so in a human being, there is something, it's not nivdal in a technical sense that it's yet separated from him, but in his mind, he does have 2 levels of intelligence. One is how he understands the idea. The second is how he's going to teach it to someone. Then you need the tzimtzum to actually reveal that. With God, that step, there's no havdalah at all. Even that step doesn't exist. And that's the Ili Yitzur. Why is it Ili Yitzur? Because it's hard for us to imagine that. Because humanly it's not possible. How could a teacher teach an idea if he didn't in somewhat define what that idea will be? But with the Eibishter, he could just will it. He wants creation. So now, what do you call it? You don't call it Nivdal, you call it his galus. That's what I believe he's adding in the parentheses. Now, why does he have to add this? That's the thing that needs more explanation, which I think I did explain the first time we learned it. It's adding, I believe, a dimension here to show how much it's unified, the primis is when it comes from God's perspective. Whereas the teacher, at the end of the day, he could ultimately distinguish and say, here's how I understand the idea, here's what I'm going to teach my student. So he could articulate two steps. Here, it's like, in a sense, it's all one, and the only difference is it's more revealed or less revealed. Because God did not have to create a Atzmus, or what he calls a Havdalah. All he had to do was say, I want to have creation. Anyway, that's how I think I understand. That's how I understand this parentheses. But again, I'd like to look into it more before I really finalize that. So that's for now.
Rabbi, did you turn on the YouTube out of curiosity?
I believe it's on. Yeah, why it's not working?
I don't see it when I went to go post the class like I usually do in the middle of the class, and I don't see it live.
I see it here. I see it's on.
It's live. It's okay.
I apologize. There's something I'm not saying, but maybe today, maybe you can post today's class because there's something.
I see it. It's right now. It's actually it's right now rolling.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting. Again, if you could post today's class in the WhatsApp group, there's something going on with me that I can't see the live class on YouTube. But I believe you. I'm just saying I can't see it. Oh, live. Just a second. I went to live. To watching. Okay, I found it. Sorry.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions about what I just said about the parentheses? Okay. Continuing on. U'kamoi kain, klol ha'sinyan ha'yisavus. So now he's going back to the nimshal, to the moral, what he's discussing here. So too, the general creation or general existence, gam hashara b'keach, gam b'hashara b'keach, including the way it is envisioned in potential within him as he's envisioning, like we said at the bottom of the previous page. Hurak b'chinas is galus levad. From God's point of view, it's just his galus, it's just another expression of his. And everything is encompassed and unified in unequivocal and utter unity, seamless unity. And I was coming back to how God joins the two levels of das, tachta and dasaya. And that's when we say Kel Deus Havaya, the Gaba Atzmus is Baruch. Beis Shavin. Like he explained earlier, even though they're two different perspectives, but from God's point of view, Das Tachten is just like Das Alya. Or the words he's using now, we just used now, that creation is just another expression of his. The Das Tachten, the Hainu B'chinas Ayin Shel Hayesh. Das Tachten, which means the Ayin Eliki, the divine Ayin, that vivifies and creates existence, and the very existence itself, it is the same level of bittul and achdus, just like the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, which is beyond existence, because it's all is about God's expression. From our point of view, there's a big difference between Das Tachton and Das Elyon, because the Tzimtzum and Parsa have an effect, two different perspectives. But from God's point of view, it's all one. And then he continues, and you see here how he's tying it all together and bringing it back to Shema Yisrael. So he says, and so too is it, the Yichud Lamata b'Neshamas Yisrael, when Neshamas Yisrael say Shema Yisrael, and Meyachd because right now he was talking about from God's perspective. But now he's saying that also when we come down Lamata on the Neshamas Yisrael, and through our contemplation and Avodah and Shema, of being miyachid, saying, declaring, and understanding and experiencing the yichud of being miyachid in the level of yichud Elah and yichud Tata, as we learn Shema and Baruch Shem, or Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu and Hashem Echad, Shezeh b'beis b'chinas ayin hanal, which is, these two correspond to the two levels of ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, or ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, Yichud Elah, and ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, as explained earlier. It's not just enough to recognize these two levels of Yichud, but you have to unite both of them, and recognize that there's a third aspect here, that both of them are equal. Hanal. L'mahava echad be'echad, the expression is. Echad be'echad, the one yichud with the other yichud. So not only is it a fact that from God's point of view it's that way, we also, our mitzvah of yichud, of Hashem Echad, of the Yachid Yisbarach, Oisei Yisbarach, consists of not just the two levels of Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, but also to recognize that Yichud Tata is mamish like Yichud Elah. And now he spells out what that means. V'hainu, and that means the B'chinas Ha'ayin Shal Yesh, that the Ayin of the Yesh, even the Ayin that manifests and relates to the Yesh, like Basar Ma'amaris Nivra Elam, Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia, divine energy that's tailored and defined to create a particular structure. Who gam ke Atzmus Yisbarach. It's also from Atzmus Yisbarach. It's not coming from the higher level of ayin, like he said earlier. It's not ayin ma'ayin. That first you have a er habligvul, and from the er habligvul comes a er hagvul. No, this er itself, er hagvul that fits the yesh, comes from Atzmus directly. Remember, two tracks from this core. Umuyuchad be'betachlis, and it's utterly united with him. Uba mebchinas Atzmus, shalei b'chinas richug v'nivdal. And from Atzmus' point of view, there's no distance, and it's not separate like it is from our point of view. Because from Atzmus' point of view, that Tzimtzum does not interrupt or pause or conceal anything. Valkain, and therefore, Gam Kameshababa is galus. Even when it comes to his galus, like he said, his galus, that it does emerge, it's utterly united in the core essence. This is all part of what we need to be miyachid Hashem, not just the two levels, but this higher level, third level, where they join as one. So it's not just the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, but everything that was created, everything on this level is amshachah from Atzmus, and it's utterly united with him in utter unity. Keeps saying that language that he used from the top of the page. So what defines it as creation? Because something did emerge. God wanted something to manifest. However, that manifestation is all part of Atzmus. U'kamoya oir b'chlal. And he's comparing it now to oir in general. Even though here we're talking about yesh existence, hu b'chinas hagilui. So generally speaking, oir we say is the gili hamoir. A yesh does not reveal the source because God created the yesh in a way that it shouldn't feel its source. Or it does reveal the source. So he's now saying, from this perspective, there's no difference in oir and yesh because both of them are expression of godliness. I believe that's what he's saying. The creation and the desire of God in creating, is more Isgalus because this is Isgalus of the power of creation. And then he concludes, and this is the meaning when we say in Shema, the two phrases, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hashem Elokeinu b'chinas yichudei Elah, that's the higher yichud, Hashem Echad yichud Tata is the lower yichud, where there is a yesh that's united with the divine, which, as we learned earlier, is b'chinas Abba v'Ima, is yichudei Elah, and the yichud of Zah Malchus is yichud Tata, Commission is Bar Le'il, like we read at the bottom of page 1466, where he began this topic. And these two levels of yichud are in one pasuk, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, because it's referring to mahava echad be'echad, to unite the echad of yichud Elah and the echad of yichud Tata, shegam yichud Tata, or the other way around, that it's united just as yichud Elah, and that's the joining of the two. And with that, the Rebbe Rashab stops. This is where the Rebbe Rashab stopped writing. So he does tie it together. So we have a conclusion to what we learned at the bottom of 1466. Like I said, now it's 11 pages back. But what he doesn't do is say that Apizen now will understand how this is bonus of the Nefesh Elikis affects the Nefesh Habamis. In the Maimer of Amagbi, L'Sheves, of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, that's what comes next. So very likely that would be what would come next here. But he does tie it up. It doesn't leave it hanging in the middle of a sentence, but he does. But he stops at this point what his bonus is, and that's where we're going to discuss what he would have said, which I already did when we learned it the first time, and it's in my essay, which people want me to study. We'll learn it together, so we'll learn that together, where I spell it out exactly what does it say in the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. But getting back to what is said here, this is the Isbannus, the utter Isbannus of how existence ultimately is not just bottled to Elikus. In other words, it's not just that it's subjugated and it recognizes the art that there's an artist. It doesn't only recognize godliness that's beyond existence, but it recognizes that existence itself and the Elikus that relates to existence is exactly like Elikus that's beyond existence, and both are miyuchid and Atzmus mamish. That's the ultimate. So it's really three stages in the journey of appreciating and experiencing yichud. Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah, and that which is beyond both and unites both, which is miyachid liyachid lemahava echad be'echad, what he calls the unification of the two yichudim. Okay. So there we go. Second time around that we have concluded Ayin Beis. Second siyum. Are there any questions?
So the bottom line means that this is the Ein Oid. This is Gvul.
No, this is not Ayin Beis.
This is not the Ein Oid?
Nope.
No? Higher than Gvul and Bli Gvul, that's not the Ein Oid?
Ein Oid is that the Helam itself is rooted in the Helam Atzmi. This is all really Havayu Elikim, but I'm going to discuss that at a later class, not today. Ein Oid is another track that has to be addressed, which is that the Helam itself, the Keich HaHelam, Tzimtzum itself, is rooted in Helam Atzmi. Is there a connection to these three levels? Maybe. I've been trying to figure out but I would right now call it Ayin Beis because the Rebbe Rashab on page 1349, which, as I said, I'll discuss more at length. If you have a little patience in an upcoming class, this will be the last class this week till I get back, but I will discuss this very directly.
So the Ein Oid, I know you said you did not explain it, is even higher than that, or it's a explanation in that? Higher than that, this is Atzmus, above Gvul and Bli. This is Atzmus. Nothing is higher than that.
Well, first of all, there's no such thing as a limitation. This is still the element of the yichud of the two yichudim, right? So, my understanding, I believe, is that there are three levels in Havaya Hu Elikim. And the three levels is Havaya Elikim, Yichud Zatoy, Yichud Ilah, and the yichud of both. Then the end of the pasuk says Ein Oid, where he comes to add that the very kalim themselves, the tzimtzum itself, is rooted in Helam Atzmi. So you could either say it's connected to the third level, or you could say it's a separate thing. I'm leaning that it's a separate thing based on what the Rebbe Rashab says on the bottom of 1349. Whether it's higher or not, that we'll discuss. But I don't want to discuss it right now because it has to be discussed in an organized way. Because, as I said, there is the fact that right now that the Helam and Gilui are all part of one entity, Havaya Elikim. Then there's the root of Elikim itself that's not related to Havaya. Or like what he called the Yesh HaNivra becomes Yesh HaMiti, or the Guf, the Neshama Nezunas Min HaGuf. So I want to keep that aside before we go there. I want to first finish understanding this properly.
I hear what you said. Lecheura. What you said now, Yesh HaNivro becomes the Yesh HaAmiti. This is the third level. Lecheura.
Well, based on what I understand from Ayin Beis, may not be quite that way. You see, he doesn't use that language here. He could have easily said Yesh HaMiti, Yesh HaNivra. But it could be. I don't want to, as I said, you're asking me something I want to discuss right now because it needs a lot more introduction and context. And it's something the Rebbe Rashab never really spells out. In my essay that I've been writing, I talk about it. But it seems to me, because it's connected to the Shleishik Sodim and Kesher Shem Tov El Al Gabeim, to keep that in mind. So there's four levels. And that's negated to the whole picture. But as I said, I don't want to jump the gun. It's just going to confuse everybody.
I have a question on the notion that well, you can say it multiple different ways. Das Tacht and Das Elyon are part of one higher, complete integrated reality, or Yichud Tata Yichud Il are part of an essential Yichud, this ultimate, this Yichud of Yichudim. You can say it that way, or you could say the Helam and the Gilui are part of one highest reality, which is Atzmus. They're all saying the same thing. But my question is, just because you have Helam and Gilui as part of the highest reality, which is Atzmus, doesn't necessarily mean that we've still grasped Atzmus, because Atzmus is not graspable. It's not definable. So the fact that revelation and concealment are all part of Atzmus, it does not necessarily mean we fully understand Atzmus, because we can't. Do you understand? Maybe there's more.
There's always more.
Definitely more. Loi ze kol Atzmus shehu beirei oilomas.
Right. Yeah, there's always more. And also, even on our level, we continuously grow in our appreciation or understanding of these levels. As I said, I think that every person has a different perspective on what Atzmus is. And for that matter, Yechud Tato and Yechud Ilah as well. That's why we have to personalize this. I don't want to make this theoretical. personalize, you have to ask yourself, where do you stand with your Yehuda Tata, with your Yesh, and how aligned is it with godliness? Then you can talk about where do you stand with your Yehuda law. Then you can talk about the third. It's a constant journey, regardless. You never end. This never ends.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You see, the reason, again, I want to wait before I elaborate on this fourth level is because, firstly, the Rebbe Rashab himself says, I said on page 1349, he says it's an inyan la'atzmei. And remember, here he's still talking about a yichud of Havaya and Elikim, Havaya Elikenu, Havaya Echad. That is Havaya Elikim. It's not talking about Elikim itself is rooted in the Helam Ha'atzmi. So if you think about it, this is still a revelation thing, his galus. Like he said, well, I'm using his galus in a different way right now, but it means that we are recognizing that from God's point of view, all of existence is part of God, and the tzimtzum doesn't affect him. He didn't say here that the tzimtzum itself is part of God's power of koyach ha'helam ha'atzmi. I think that's an additional point. Again, where it belongs, is it a third level? Is it part of the third level? Is it part of a fourth level? That is not spelled out here. As I said, I'm middle of literally writing hopefully the last Pedic chapter of my essay addresses this as well. Because this ultimately comes down to what would the Rebbe Rashab have said later? Would he have brought back Einoid? I would like to believe that he would go back to it. But he gave us enough hints. As I said, page 1349 is critical, page 1301. I have some very strong indications of where this is going based on things the Rebbe Rashab wrote earlier. But as I said, to share those discoveries, I want to wait because I don't want to rush it. I want to elaborate on it. Okay. So I'm not going to say Mazel Tov. We have more to talk about before we really conclude what comes next. And we'll do that. And as I said, I'm happy to study together my essay on all of this, which right now looks like it'll be 7 parts. Yeah, I'm almost done with it. I worked on it yesterday a bit. Okay, so we came to the end of Ayin Beis, which is the middle of page 1477. When I get back, we're going to get back to this and elaborate more, sum it all up, and try to discuss all the aspects of the things the Rebbe Rashab did not finish. And maybe we'll do it, as I said, inside of my essay. So this will be tomorrow. Today's Wednesday. Thursday through next. What did I say? Monday night.
Next Wednesday, you
said
including next
Tuesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, we're going to resume next Wednesday.
Yeah, that's what you said.
Resume next
I'm
Wednesday or
landing
next Thursday?
I'm landing Tuesday morning. So we'll resume next Wednesday, exactly a week from today.
Reb Simon, why did the Rebbe Rashab not continue when we have after that 2 more years, more than 2 more years?
I don't know. First of all, we don't know. Maybe he wrote this till Tafresh Pei. How do you know? We don't know. We know earlier he zeichens Tafresh Ayin Ches. That doesn't mean he didn't continue writing afterwards. We know at least till Tafresh Ayin. This may have been written days before his Istalkus, for all you know. We don't know exactly when this was written. But it's definitely not before 1918. But it could be later. So.
But some also hold that he may have written more, and we just don't have it.
Who holds that? Then no one. Who holds that? Who said that?
I'll get you the source.
Yeah, that's a speculation completely. How would they know that?
That's a good question, but I'll find out for you.
No, that's just a guess. But we have all the manuscripts of the Rebbe Rashab. There's nothing missing. It would be very unlikely that it got lost or something, because Friedrich Rebbe was there. He had the whole manuscript, and you read on the bottom, we see in the manuscript that he stopped writing there. He didn't continue. It's not like a lost page or something. He stopped. That's where he stopped. So you'd have to say he wrote in a different booklet. Most likely, this was very close to the. Remember, this was also a time of war and revolution in Rostov. A lot of upheaval going on, and he was also saying Maimorim. Remember, Tafresh Pei is a whole sefer of Maimorim of the Rebbe Rashab. He was saying and delivering and writing Maimorim from 1920 and 1919, obviously.
And I test powerful Mamorim, powerful.
Yeah, so we don't have a definitive explanation because we just know Atkan Nimtze Beguf Seviyat Kedesh. We know he doesn't answer the questions, and most likely it would not be just one more page. If he really finished it, it would be at least 20, 30 pages minimum. And okay, so it doesn't exist. At least we don't have it. I mean, my essay I write, we don't have it. We don't have it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist somewhere. But however you explain it, whether it's there, we don't have it. So regardless, we have to try to figure it out. Okay.
This
Go ahead, Eliezer, please. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this yichud of yichud tata and yichud Allah, is there a term for that? Do we in Hasidus like yichud shlema or something? The yichud of these two yichudim?
No,
Is there a term?
Called lemahave echad beechad is what he uses here.
Right.
Or earlier he used the yichud in page 1466. He used the expression lechaber liyachid lechaber beis bechinas yichud.
But there's no term for that, so to speak. That's exact term, specific.
Not that I know of.
And this idea of the two yichud of the two yichudim, is it discussed elsewhere besides in other areas, in other places?
We learned about it. We learned about it in Torah Shalom. I learned it here after we finished Ayin Beis the first time. I think I learned the Torah Shalom where he talks about it a bit. They're probably discussed. I have to look around.
That might be something for ChatGPT, Yitzhak. Find out. There's something there.
Find out what?
If the discussion of this third level, and I guess Rabbi Jacobs is saying it's not necessarily a node. It's not a node, but this yichud of the two yichud.
ChatGPT will not tell you whether it's a node. That I could tell you right now. It will not know that.
Even your ChatGPT, Rabbi Jacobson. Can we ask Rabbi Jacobson?
It'll say what I just said. It'll say what I just said. That it may be or maybe not.
I got you.
It's not going to create a new level. I mean, unless it's an hallucination, then it's not accurate. But I don't believe it's in any mimer discussed the Einoid with this because this is unique Ayin Beis themes. But listen, I continue to always research and look. Something is found that we can discover. I mean, obviously, the Mittler Rebbe's mimer plays important here because he does discuss this. He does discuss both Yechudim. And I think even I don't know if he calls it the Yichud of both Yechudim, but he definitely discusses the idea. And we'll keep looking, but I'm confident that we will have a pretty clear picture.
You know how I'm just thinking how this relates to, in Chumash when we have parshas that are mechubar, right? The Ve'yelich and Tzavim, and the Rebbe always has an inyan that when they're separate, they have a separate inyan. And then on a week that you learn them and they're together, it's a unique yuchud that it changes both of it. It's not just it's a synthesis, and it's even more it creates a whole new unity, a whole new parsha, so to speak, where the two parshas are read together. Is that how would you relate this to what we're saying here of the Yichudi Tata, Yichudi Allah, and then when they're together? Is that some type of relationship like that? What the Rebbe talks about, how that is?
You could apply that here. That yesterday I gave an example that when you're so absorbed in something, you lose sight of your own self. The subject and object melt into one. Like Yehuda Tata, there's no question there's a subject and an object. There's you, but either with your mind or with your emotions, you recognize that I am dedicated to God. So you're eating a meal, you bench, you make brachas, basically bitla yesh. In other words, you're not just self-indulgent, you are aligning yourself to God. That's Yichud Tata in general terms. Yichud law is where you don't even exist. Only the thing that exists is godliness. From that point of view, all of existence is ayin. Only yesh amiti. Then there comes that we exist, and that existence is also part of Atzmus itself. So in that context, you could say the first level is where the subject and object are two entities, but you choose at your volition, like he said earlier, but it's sene, with your own will, that I am going to be God's servant, and I'm going to serve God. But that doesn't mean you're Eis Metzias. Just means that you have chosen to be part of God's army, so to speak. The second level is there's no you altogether. It's just God, and that you recognize that. There's a total bittul. The third, which means that there's only a subject, there's no object. And the third is a subject and object, but they become so one that you can't distinguish between them because it's all Atzmus. Existence itself is part of Atzmus. Like the second level, if you stop at the second level, it can lead to a life of asceticism or a life where you are removed from the material world, like a rotze without a shuv. Whereas the third one is existence, but the whole existence is only godliness. So there, it's a synergy that you're describing that's more than the sum of the parts. So it's not just bringing together two levels of yichud. It's a completely different dimension. And that is a whole different level of absorption. And it's like you're walking this earth, but all you are is a God's channel. Whereas in the first level, you don't have that extent of bittul. Second level, you're not necessarily walking the earth. You just completely bottle, and in a way you could say it's like the opposite of the kavanah because it's like chleis hanefesh without a guf. Whereas the third level, you're walking this earth, but it's like atzmus channeled through you as a transparent channel. So in that sense, but there's a lot to say in this itself. I just gave one example of how this would be applied. I'm sure there's other ways to explain it.
Because it seems like that this gets back to sort of like Yitzhak's question a long time ago, where he said, bittul b'metzias, the second level, seems to be like you're losing yourself in godliness. How can you be retain your individual consciousness at the same time become a bittul b'metzias? And I thought we made a maskana there. At least I remember, and it was a big chiddush for me that that you could see it when you could see it from bittul b'metzias, that you are now looking at it from Das Elyon, from God's perspective. You're not a separate. You're like a Talmud Chacham is a walking Torah. He becomes a walking, as you just said, a piece of Chelik Elokam Mamash walking in this world. He's
Yeah, but that may not be. That may be the third level, not the second.
That's what I was thinking. That's the third level. That's the third level.
Yeah, because Yichudei law is really, from God's point of view, there is no existence. It's like existence is insignificant. The third level, they come together. There is a Das Tachten, there is a Das Elyon, but they're all one.
Why is that second level from Das Elyon alone? He sees us as individuals. He sees creation, but it's only from his perspective, but it still exists in him, doesn't it?
Well, because it doesn't, because Das Elyon does not include Das Tachten.
Right, but it doesn't need to talk. But the fact that like the creator sees he sees a creation, but it's only from his perspective. Only his perspective.
But we want to have a creation, also a real creation that recognizes there's another perspective.
Right.
And
so
that itself is his perspective.
Right. That's a deeper perspective. That's that third level. But from that second level, I'm just saying that the fact that God's looking at it from his perspective only, he still sees an Avram Avinu.
Okay, so how would you explain the difference between the second and the third?
Because the third one is that we can achieve that understanding. We see ourselves from God's perspective alone. So to
That's
speak.
not. I don't know if that's the third. The third is, remember, also God has the third.
That's the second one also.
No, the second one you're just seeing God's from. You're just seeing second one from God's perspective. You're just seeing his Das Elyon, his perspective. Like there's no Simpson, right? We learned extensively here. From God's perspective, there's no Simpson. Everything, there's no Parsha, there's no Simpson. He sees everything. There's no change in time because he sees it from something higher than time, higher than space, and higher than all these aspects. Everything exists to him as
I think you may be confusing it. First of all, the fact that there's no Tzimtzum means that even after the Tzimtzum, there's no Tzimtzum. Das Elyon is not that level. Das Elyon means it's before the Tzimtzum in the first place. It's not that even after the Tzimtzum, there's no Tzimtzum. That's the difference. Das Elyon is simply a perspective of Elokus before the Tzimtzum. There's no existence from that point of view. Anyway.
Okay. I mean, the shift that goes on is the shift that happens from Hashem's perspective. That shift doesn't really. I mean, it's from our perspective. We're seeing from Milamata, but that shift has always been there in Elokus. He sees it without the shift. I don't know. Okay, we'll dig deeper.
Okay, so we'll stop here. We finished the Hemshech. I'm going to stop the